Yeah, we have this 2-day workshop on what is not love and Krishnaji's approach to this topic of love through negation. So we'll have 4 dialogues, and I feel this topic is quite wide. Because first of all, we'll have to understand what is negation and then apply that approach, how it becomes applicable to discover what love is. And then we'll have to consider various things about love, where Krishnaji talks about love having its own intelligence. Then he also talks about faith and love to go together. And he also says that love means freedom. Freedom and love are connected, or they are maybe one and the same thing. And then we'll also have to talk about why there is no love in our life, which means, again, if we have to take the approach of negation, which means that we'll have to find out what are the things in our life which come in the way of love, in the sense that they prevent that quality from coming into our life. So which means there may be some factors in our day-to-day life which actually work against love, which don't allow love to come in our life. Now, the word love is highly loaded. It is loaded with so many different meanings, and Krishnaji rejects all those meanings. So whatever we understand by that word love, he rejects all that, and he puts it in a completely different dimension. And some seer had said that love is such an important quality that if you have all the other qualities except love, then they are not enough. But if you have only love and no other qualities, then that love will get all those qualities in you. So it is such an important aspect of human life, and it will be worthwhile to explore why it is missing from human life. So first of all, we have to understand what is this negation and why is it necessary, why only the approach of negation is possible in case of love. And negation seems to be quite a central approach in Krishnaji's teaching, because he doesn't talk about the positive approach. For example, when he talks about order in our daily life, right, then he doesn't talk about how to establish the order. He doesn't tell us the system, method, or whatever it is which will help us establish the order. On the contrary, he says that you don't have to establish order. All that you have to do is find out the factors which are creating disorder in your life. So if you are able to find out those factors which are responsible for disorder in your life, and you work on those factors and remove them from your life, then there will be order by itself. We don't have to establish it. So this is again an approach of negation, because you don't go after what you want, but you explore what you have and try to find out in what way it is preventing that which you want to have. And if you are able to work on that and remove those things, then whatever probably you are seeking is already there. So this is quite similar to an approach in mathematics where when you want to prove something, then you assume the opposite of what you want to prove. And then you say that if this opposite is true, then it contradicts all the established and proven things in mathematics. So whatever is already verified, proved, established, if your assumption contradicts that, then that assumption must be wrong. And therefore, if the contrary thing is wrong, therefore the other thing must be right. That is, it should be true. So that this approach is not exactly that, but something quite similar. Now, why this approach of negation? That is because our thought or our thinking capacity or thinking process is quite capable of projecting anything which it considers as positive or which it considers as negative, right? So if we have a positive approach to what is love, which means that you start defining love. Love is this, love is that, and so on, right? Then all that may be just the projection of thought. Those may be just the ideas or the concepts generated by the thinker. And so it becomes the product of the thinker. So then love becomes the product of the thinker, which means love is just another thought. So if love is the product of thought, then it is not different from thought. Then it belongs to the same field. The field of knowledge, the field of consciousness, it just becomes another content of consciousness. And therefore, it is not a different dimension at all. It belongs to the same field. Therefore, the positive approach is not possible if we want to come upon that quality of love. Because positive approach will only give us the concept, the ideas about what love is. But those ideas and those concepts are not actual love, not that actual quality. And therefore, only through negation it may be possible to come upon that. So now, what is this approach of negation? So Krishnaji says that you have to deny, you have to reject all that which is not love. So then he asks us to explore our own life and find out what we consider as love. And whatever we consider as love, we have to explore it and find out, is it really love? And then if it is not love, then we have to just leave it. It has to be just left. Now, this approach of negation is not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. Like say when Krishnaji is saying that love is not desire, love is not pleasure, love is not memory, and then he says so many things which are not love. So one may end up with a big list of things which one says that they are not love. But then, howsoever long list one may make, right, still one is as far away from that quality called love as he was before making the list. Because negation doesn't mean the intellectual agreement or disagreement. when Krishnaji is describing what love is not, if we are merely intellectually agreeing with it, right, then that agreement is not negation. It is not denial of all those things which he is talking about. And since it is not negation, therefore we are where we were before hearing that. So that what is this negation? I mean, how does one deny? How does one? So that is out of understanding of that thing. And this understanding has to happen when you are in the midst of that feeling or that event or that happening. What I mean is this, that somebody say who has fallen in love. Now he is all the time thinking of the other person. And whenever he remembers that other person, he feels nice, he feels good. And to such a person, if you tell him, see, whatever you are thinking about that person, that thought is not love. You are remembering that person is not love. So he is not going to accept that. He is going to reject outright. He will say, what you are talking? Remembering that person makes me feel so good. I feel that only remembering and thinking about that person seems to be the only worthwhile thing to do. Everything else is almost worthless. And then he's saying that love is not memory, love is not thought, so not acceptable. So which means that these statements, they become mere intellectual statements. And if it is an intellectual statement, all that you can do is either agree or disagree with them. And agreeing or disagreeing with them, it doesn't mean negation. Negation is not the matter of agreeing or disagreeing. Because if it is merely an intellectual concept, then you either agree or disagree with it. So then what is negation? So we said that the negation is possible only through understanding. So when you understand something as false, so understanding doesn't mean the intellectual agreement. Understanding means you really feel, you really see, you realize that it is false. So the moment there is a realization that certain thing is false, there is that thing immediately drops. It is finished. And that is actually the negation. That means if one sees very clearly that love is not thought or love is not desire, then that thing is just dropped. That means there is no more activity of equating thought with love or equating desire with love. So when we see something as false, then that false is no longer existing. And if the false doesn't exist, then there is only truth. So that is how the approach of negation. Now we have to also distinguish that the negation doesn't mean the wiping out of those factors. I mean, one may say that yes, if we just wipe out from our memory all these things which are not love, then will there be love? So probably not. It is just like erasing the memory of a computer. So if you erase the memory of a computer, there is nothing. So there is a difference between the memory of a human brain and memory of a computer. Human brain has what is called as consciousness. So there are sensations, there are feelings, there are emotions, and there is this sense of existence. Now, all that is not there in the machine. So negation doesn't mean wiping up of the memory. But negation means the understanding of those things, the psychological contents which exist in our consciousness. And out of the understanding of those psychological contents, they come to their end. And in case of machines, there is no possibility of a different dimension at all. And therefore, the approach of negation is not valid there. In case of human life, Krishnaji has always talked about a dimension which is totally different, which is not touched by thought, which is not contaminated by thought, which has nothing to do with thought. So he has always talked about that kind of dimension of a human life. And to come upon that dimension of human life, we have to deny or negate everything which is not of that dimension, which means that the total activity of the thinker has to be denied. Only then that thing which is not the product of thought can be there. So the approach of negation is valid in the psychological field, where you are trying to find out something which is not the product of that field, which is not of that field, but which is something totally different, which is completely outside that field. And therefore, whatever content of that field is mistaken as the other dimension has to be negated, has to be denied. And only then there is the space for that other thing to come into our life or come into existence. So this is the approach. So which necessitates that whatever content in us that needs to be observed, that needs to be understood. And only out of that there is a possibility of a different dimension coming into life. Now Krishnaji also says that where there is suffering, there cannot be love if there is suffering. Now suffering is usually mostly due to the conflict in one's life. There are contradictory desires, contradictory pursuits, there are things happening which are not according to what one wants them to happen. They are contrary to one's expectations. And then one suffers in that. So suffering is basically in the field of knowledge, in the field of consciousness. And therefore, it has nothing to do with love. And unless the suffering ends, there cannot be love. We may say that we have this sense of affection. We say that, yes, we love our children. We say that, yes, we love so and so. But Krishnaji questions it. He says, is it really love? Or is it merely a dependence on that person? Is it that one is trying to fulfill oneself through that person? And then, why is there this conflict and so on? So let us consider this phenomenon of falling in love. We just want to examine whether what is called as love, whether it is really love or something else. So you come in contact with a person. Sometimes in the very first meeting itself, you are completely taken over by that person. And then that triggers a thinking process in you about that person. But that rarely happens. Most of the times, due to acquaintance and due to frequent meetings and all those things, you start thinking about a certain person. And then the more you think, the more you start liking that person. And you feel nice whenever you think about that person. So that becomes then your major occupation. And then you find that if you are not thinking of that person, then you are missing something. So you have to keep on thinking about that person, and you imagine all kinds of things about that person. The nice time you had, the nice conversations you had, the nice company you had, so many different things. And whenever one thinks, one feels nice. And therefore, that becomes a kind of encouragement to keep on thinking about the other person. And then out of that, then those two persons, they come together. Whenever they are together, they feel very nice. There is a lot of excitement. There is a lot of passion there. And so then they desire each other's company and so on. And then the other person, or both of them, become almost possessive of each other. Possessive in the sense that if that person is talking to somebody else, then there is a sense or feeling of jealousy. So the jealousy arises. And that jealousy is taken as the indication of love. You want to possess that person. You want to exclusively possess that person. And therefore, whenever there is a possibility of something contrary happening, you don't like it. There is this sense of jealousy. And the persons they come together. Maybe they are able to marry and start living together and so on. So life is quite a happy thing. And slowly they get used to each other. Because you see, what is happening is this, that the self or the self-centeredness is completely taken over by the other person. And therefore, there is a good feeling because self is not active in its usual way, creating conflicts and so on. So there is a nice feeling about the whole thing. But as one gets used to each other, then the self is back, because getting used to each other is the property of the self. And therefore, then it is back to its tricks or back to its normal state. And then whatever the person had done for the other, then it started thinking about the whole thing. And then this sense of having done so much for that person. And when you have that sense, then naturally you also have expectations that I am doing so much for the other person. So is it not my legitimate right to expect at least this much? You start getting used to the other person, right? Then this sense that I have been doing so much for the other person, that comes in. Because when you look back at that state, when you say that yes, you are really loving that person, and you look back at that state, right, you see yourself as doing so many things for the other person. Well, actually, when you are doing those things, there was no such sense that you are doing those things for the other person. There was no such sense. In fact, one was willing to do anything without even feeling that one is doing so much for the other person. But the moment the self comes in, right, then there is again the measurement. Then it says that, oh, I did so much for the other person. And when you have that kind of sense that you are doing so much for the other person, then naturally there is also an expectation. And one then says to oneself that I am doing so much for the other person, is it not my legitimate right to expect at least this much? So then the expectations come in. And then one starts expecting many things from the other person. And when the expectations are not met, right, then that feel good sensation is gone. Then one says that, well, I'm doing so much, but the other person is not even reciprocating my smallest expectation. And therefore, then that's the end of that feel good relationship. And then something totally opposite may happen. That means then there may be quarrels, there may be conflicts, then each one going in his own way, having his or her own occupation, and living almost a separate life. Although living together, but still being separate. So, which means that whatever was considered as love was not love at all. It was just the absence of the self. And absence of the self can be as simple as a child occupied with a toy. When a child is occupied with a toy, it has forgotten all its mischievousness, it has forgotten all the other things which it wants to do. It's completely absorbed with that toy. But when that interest in the toy is over, the child is back to its tricks. So as long as it was occupied with the toy, the self was hidden. Self was not that active. It was completely absorbed in that toy. Similarly here, with the other person, the self is completely absorbed. Self is, for the time being, not there. And therefore, all the conflict, all the friction, the activity of the self keeps on bringing in, that is for the time being is not there. And that is what makes oneself feel good. But soon that self may be back, because absence of the self is not the normal state for the self. The normal state of the self is to be active all the time, so that it strengthens its existence, it feels stronger. And therefore, when the self is back, naturally all that good feeling, everything is over. And then the whole thing is taken over by the self. And then the conflicts. So in some cases, people, they just have some kind of compromise and continue to live together. Or some people, they separate because they don't find it any longer comfortable to live with the other person. So the very fact that it breaks up in such a way only indicates that probably what was considered as love was not love at all. Then one says that one loves one's children. But in that love for children, there are also lots of expectations. In fact, most of the parents have lots of expectations from their children. And if those expectations are not met, then there is a little bit of bitterness about the whole thing. Particularly when children grow up and no longer willing to listen to the parents, then the parents don't feel the same kind of love as they would have felt when the children were very young. That feeling of love may be replaced by the feeling of worry, and also the unfulfilled expectations. And then many times the children have expectations from the parents and the parents have expectations from the children, And then there again, there is some adjustment. Then there is some give and take, that okay, if children do this thing, then the parents will give them that thing. So that kind of deal is sometimes struck. So all that indicates that, yes, it is not love. And we have said that life is relationship. But in that relationship, if there is no sense of love, then that relationship merely becomes a functional kind of relationship. A relationship which is based on function, based on some inevitable interaction. But in that, there is no sense of love or affection. One doesn't feel related with the other person. Although one may be living with the other person, but one doesn't feel that one is related to that person. And therefore, that is not a relationship at all. So then how does one go about this whole thing? Does one have to work on those things which are not love, and eventually one will come to understand them, and they will get negated? You see, one of the things that has been observed as happening, as one examines one's life and tries to live a life of awareness, a life of attention, where one is observing everything that is happening to one. So there, most of the psychological factors, they become weaker and weaker, in the sense that you see no point in continuing with those things, because they seem to be such a lot of waste. So it no longer interests you. So you must have seen that as you go deeper into what Krishnaji is talking about, most of your other interests, they start disappearing. You no longer feel interested in them, because the energy of desire, which was working in those directions, is no longer working in those directions, because you no longer desire them, or you are no longer interested in them. And you haven't yet found out what you are really interested in. And therefore, there is no manifestation or working or functioning of the energy. Because the energy which was previously going in different interests in different directions, now those things are no longer interesting, and one hasn't yet found out what one is really interested in. And therefore, there is a kind of staticity. That means one is not moving. One has come to such a stage where one is not interested in moving, because all movement one finds as useless or not worth. But what is worth is not yet found. Therefore, there is no movement in that direction also. So that is the point where one has to actually hold on, one has to actually stay with that and try to find out where one's real interest lies. Otherwise, many people, they go in despair, they get despaired. There may be social pressure, family pressure on them to do certain things. They are not interested in doing those things, but out of that pressure, they have to do those things, which doesn't interest them. Then life is no longer pleasant. Then life becomes very hard life. So one needs to push this inquiry much further than that. So I think I have done some preliminary talk on this topic of love. And your questions now will bring more clarity to it.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Yes, sir.
A responsibility towards the whole human being. How to understand this, sir?
No, first of all, does one feel responsible for the totality of humanity? Or is it merely a concept? Because when you actually feel responsible for something, then you are very particular about that something. Then whatever is required, you will see to it that it is done. So there is no question of escape from that. But if there is no actual feeling of responsibility, and then one says that, well, one has to be responsible for the totality of humanity, then that responsibility becomes merely a concept. And when it is a concept, it will be interpreted as per one's own ideas, one's own opinions, likes and dislikes. So he may define that being responsible to the whole of humanity means this kind of action or this kind of doing and so on, and then may end up in doing those things. But even while doing those things, actually psychologically there is no feeling, there is no sense of being responsible to the whole of humanity. Because finally it will come to a stage where again a person will say that, yes, I did so much for humanity, but what they have given to me. So if your work is not recognized, you are not given the proper applaud for what you are doing for the rest of the human beings, then you don't like it. Then you say that, well, I did so much, but they are not doing even a simple applaud, they are not giving. So you may get disinterested in that activity. So then where is the sense of responsibility? So I think the sense of responsibility, probably love has no sense of responsibility. When there is an action out of love, so in that action, there is no such sense that there is no sense of responsibility in that, in the sense that you don't say that you are doing it for that other person. A sense of responsibility also includes the sense of duty. Because if you are responsible for something, then it is your duty to do something about that thing about which you feel responsible.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Yesterday, you
Yes.
had sent 2 links along with the email. I have watched
Yes.
both the videos around both of them together through 3 hours. In that, what he's
Yeah.
saying is, we normally have show responsibility towards our family. We earn money, we feed the wife, children, whatever. But
Yeah.
we don't have that responsibility towards the whole humanity, human beings. He's saying the whole world. This I didn't
Yes.
understand. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So no, that only is indicating that I have drawn my circle only to include my family. And that for family, I say that I feel responsible. Right? But even that sense of responsibility doesn't have that quality of love. That sense of responsibility is coming only because I have identified myself with my family, and therefore I am only being responsible to myself by being responsible to the family. But then Krishnaji is also saying that if at all you have to draw a circle to feel responsible, then why not draw a circle which is big enough to include the whole of humanity? Why restrict only to few persons? But probably that we are not doing mainly because of the sense of security. Maybe we feel more secure if we identify ourselves with those few persons whom we consider as family. And with the rest of the humanity, we don't feel so much secure because probably we don't know anything about them. So if the thinker feels responsible, the sense of responsibility of a thinker will be based on its knowledge, its experience. And therefore, persons about whom he doesn't know anything, he doesn't feel responsible. Like say if something happens in a remote country, now I am sitting here, I'm not directly affected by that happening. And also I don't feel related with those persons living in that remote country. So I don't feel responsible for them. But that is the responsibility of the thinker, because thinker is not involved in what is happening in that remote corner. Thinker is quite safe in his own location and therefore not involved in any way. But when the self is involved, when something happens just next to you or right in your vicinity, then you are affected. Then you say that, yes, I feel responsible. So the sense of responsibility of the self is based on its own knowledge and experience and its own ideas. Right? But what Krishnaji is talking about, a sense of responsibility, that means feeling responsible. But in love, there is no sense of responsibility, because there is no sense that I am doing something for the other. So in a state of love, the action coming out of that, behind that action, there is no such sense that I am doing this for the other person. There is just that affection, that quality of love. And that's all.
Thank you, sir.
Cannot complete unselfish devotion, attendance to someone or to something be called or considered as love?
If it is
If it is
totally unselfish, you see, so there is a big condition there. How does one know that it is totally unselfish? Because even just the sense that I am doing this for the other person, right? Even that sense is an indication of selfishness. Say you might have helped some person and then you might have forgotten about it, but later on you remembered it and then you want to see how that person is doing, right? So even that desire has this sense of selfishness, although very in a subtle way, right? So if you remember the favors and the good things you have done to others, then that remembrance is also an indication of the self, the selfishness. So self could be very subtle and we may not be even aware in what form it is there. And then we may mistaken something as the real love.
I had a question to ask.
Yeah.
More like a reflection. I just feel that the moment one tries to label a relationship with any person, and that's when one starts to think about the associated responsibilities that come with that labeling of a particular relationship. And if I'm not labeling any relationship, if I'm just interacting with another human being and responding after listening to that human being, there I still feel free in that sense. But the moment I have to call this a friendship or any sort of a relationship, then comes with it the responsibility, which is largely psychological, that I need to be in a particular way in this relationship, and that is largely designed by the society in its norms. So I think labeling any relationship is what leads to adulteration of what is true, what is love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Because once the relationship is labeled, then all the background according to that label comes into play. So once the relationship is defined as husband and wife, then it brings its own background into play. And then that relationship gets almost defined by that. So what is expected from each of those two persons, and then those expectations are not met, then they will say, no, then it is not according to that relationship, and so on. So that happens with almost every kind of relationship, even parents, children, or the employer, employee. The moment the relationship is defined, that means labeled, right, then all the restrictions and the conditions according to that label, they come into play. And then the relationship, as you said, is not what it should be, but then it is in a way contaminated by that label. And then that naturally leads to conflict, because when things don't happen according to those labels, then it is leading to conflict. But then why do we still label? Maybe I think we feel more secured with the labels because it has the social sanctions and it has also
So is that security also a very psychological feeling, but
Yes.
not the truth?
Yeah, possible. Yes. So when we talk about security, we are not only talking about the physical security, but more the psychological security. And in psychological security, what we mean is that it is not enough to be actually secured, but one has to also feel that one is secured. Because if I don't feel secured, then my behavior will be as if I am not secured. Although physically I may be completely secured, but psychologically, if I don't feel secured, then my behavior will be as if I am physically also insecure. So the psychological security means feeling that I am secured. Now, what will make a person feel secured could vary, could be quite different. I mean, even an illusion, a belief in an illusion can make the person feel secured. And then those beliefs, they become very important to that person because they give him or they make him feel secured. So when we do talk about the blind faith and blind beliefs and so on, right? The belief and faith, they are always blind. But then why do persons still stick to them? Because they make them feel secured. And that is what everybody wants. Everybody wants to feel secure. And therefore, whatever makes them feel secured, to that they get attached. That is what then they want. They don't want to give it up. So maybe in relationship, when the relationship is clearly defined, then in that definition, the persons involved in relationship, they may be feeling secured because then there are do's and don'ts according to that definition. And then there is a mutual agreement that yes, we agree with this. And so that brings a sense of security. But then there may not be the actual feeling of being related. Then there is only the fact of taking each other for granted as per that relationship, as per that level of relationship.
Kishorji, one question and clarification also, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, you seem to suggest that this quality of love, the origin of this quality of love is not from within me, but
Yeah.
the origin is from a different dimension.
Yeah.
And as and when it arises, it affects everything that is happening through me.
Yes.
Whether what is happening through me is a sense of affection or a sense of selflessness, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You are suggesting that that quality of love can affect all the emotions, feelings, expressions that are happening from me.
Yeah.
So if this understanding is correct, sir, in my day-to-day life, is there any way of finding out whether that quality of love is operating through me or not?
No, but how am I going to find out? What will be the criterion? Is the criterion defined by thought? But there is another way. See, most of our emotions are triggered by the external happening. Because whenever we come in contact with something, through that contact, we respond psychologically in terms of likes, dislikes, or in terms of various sensations, emotions, and so on. So most of our sensations and emotions are triggered by the external objects, by the external events, by the external happening. But when the emotions are stirred up not by external happenings, but by that quality of the other dimension, right, then those emotions are of completely different quality, because then those emotions are not affected by what is happening outside, because it is a completely different quality, a different dimension, a quality of from the different dimension. Say you may be in the midst of a very noisy traffic, and yet there may be silence within you, the silence of the different dimension, and so no noise can disturb it. So in the very midst of the noise, you can feel that silence completely undisturbed, and you can't do anything about it. So the emotions affected by this quality of the different dimension, then those emotions then are not disturbed by what is happening around it. So what I'm trying to say is that if there is this quality of love, this sense of love, then that sense of love is not affected by what is happening around. That means that love will always remain love, irrespective of what is happening around the person. So even if somebody says something nasty, right, then that sense of love will not get affected by that. It will remain what it is. And also, you can't do anything about it. It comes when it comes. It stays whatever time it stays, and then it disappears, and you cannot invite it back. So I'm sure there must have been moments of this kind in one's life when something is being stirred up from within.
It may be a sense of duty, and there may be little affection in that devotion. Can such dedication or devotion be called love?
See, the thought is trying to identify various situations where it wants to find out whether that can be called as love. The response in that situation, whether it can be called as love. Right? But we are using all those words, devotion, and we are using many different words to indicate these different emotions. But as long as there is this sense of me, that I am feeling devotion, or I am devoted to this, or I am doing this, right? So as long as there is that sense, then that is not love. Those are just the emotions and feelings triggered by the external happening.
Just a follow on to what you said.
Yeah.
So you said that when that quality of love is there, it is independent of what has the emotions that are triggered in me, and B, there is nothing I can do to control it. It comes and goes on its own.
Yeah.
But very often I delude myself by saying that before I started this journey, I was selfish. Now, thanks to reading Krishna Ji and so on, I'm not so selfish. There is this quality of affection in me. And with whatever little awareness I have, little bit of love has also come into my consciousness. So again, this is a kind of a delusion only, no? So it's the activity of the self, because what I could understand from today's talk was this quality of love is from a totally different dimension.
Yeah.
It comes and goes, and it is not correct for me to say that a part of it has entered my consciousness and my consciousness is partly transformed.
No, it's not possible to say like that.
Yes.
See, what one can say is that, say, reading Krishnamurti, at least you have started observing. You have started observing yourself. You have started observing others. And also, you have become somewhat sensitive to concerns of the other people also. Just as you are sensitive to your own concerns, so you have also become little bit sensitive to the concerns of the other people. So in that sense, you are more considerate towards them, you are more kind to them, and you say that, well, they are also in a similar situation as you are in, and therefore you are sympathetic to them. So it's a sense of sympathy also. So all those things are there. But then why do I want to call those things as the indication of love? They may not be. Because you see, the most basic thing which goes totally against love is the selfishness. So as long as there is self in any form, however subtle it may be, that still prevents the love from coming into one's life. Where there is self, there is no love. So one has to be observant of these activities of the self at all possible levels. I don't say that therefore the touch of love is not possible at all. I'm not saying that. In fact, what could happen is that when that sense of self may disappear for the time being, and there may be that quality of love, that sense of love appearing or being there. So it may stay for some time and again it may go. But as long as the self is active, even that cannot happen. Now, sometimes in some strange ways, it may happen. But then you can't control it. It cannot happen at will. That means you cannot make it happen whenever you want it to happen, and so on. It's a completely different kind of thing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry for coming in late because my signal was giving a problem.
Okay.
You see, I just heard Venu saying love is coming in slowly, in parts. I agree with whatever you've just said. Okay, as long as self is there, love is not. So, can love come in parts and pieces, bits and pieces? That's all. That's all my question.
No, I don't think so.
Yes.
No, I think probably Venu didn't say that it comes parts and pieces. Probably he may say that yes, sometimes there is a sense of affection, then there
Yes.
is a sense of consideration, right?
Yeah.
And he was asking whether that is love.
Yes. You
And
could
we
say
said
yes.
that,
Yes.
yeah,
I stand corrected.
we said that maybe it is not love, because love has no sense of self, that I am doing this for the other, or I am sympathetic to the other, or I have to do this, that is my duty. So all these are the things which are associated with the self. The self wants to be good, the self wants to be kind, the self wants to be this, and self wants to be that. And therefore it is trying to be that through various activities, through various acts. And naturally those acts then cannot be the acts of love. They are the acts of the self. So the selfish acts.
One small added question to this.
Yeah.
Is the ending of the self is something that one has been looking for a long time.
Yes.
So ending of the self and love,
Yeah.
they seem to be almost the same thing, but it just comes and goes.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when the self is not there, that means even when the self is in abeyance, let us say, it's not completely ended, but it is in abeyance. That means it is not functional. Although it may be there, but it is not functional, it is not interfering, right? So even in that case, there may be this touch of love. There may be this touch of the other dimension. And then the self becomes active and that thing is lost. And then the self has the memory of that. What was that like? And then it may try to re-experience it through the memory. But then it finds that it cannot. It's not the same as the actual happening. And so it cannot be repeated. It can only remember that, well, it was like that. But it cannot make it happen again.
Is there so I know it's a bit of a speculative question. I've always wondered, that was Krishna ji experiencing that state of love or ending of the self all the time? But you may answer, you may not answer, but I've been speculating this for a long time. That's why I'm asking this.
Yeah. No. You see, when Krishnaji was discovered as a child, when Krishnaji was discovered by CWL, right? So that time there was outwardly nothing special visible in that boy. In fact, that boy appeared so insignificant that nobody would have believed that boy would become a world teacher. But then, what made him choose that person? What made him think that yes, he is going to be the future world teacher? So CWL has described that there was not a speck of selfishness in that boy. So he said the aura, the so-called aura of that boy, was so clean, so pure, that there was not a speck of selfishness in that. So only in such a scenario, maybe the love is able to manifest. So there was no selfishness of any kind in that boy, and therefore probably the love could manifest in the life of that person. So it seems that the selfishness seems to be the major hindrance, the major obstruction for that quality of love to be.
We were talking on this
Yeah,
particular
yeah.
subject.
Please go ahead.
In order to understand what is love, we are going away from that word and close by words. We were cross-checking because it becomes easy for us to cross-check those particular words which we are familiar with.
Yes.
This is my feeling. This is also the fact. But my point, whether we are able to, now love is, we are away from that love. So far we have not understood the love. By theory of negation, if it is possible for us to go closer to love, that we are seeing, observing. So similar type of words. Now I consider love as the thing or the theme beyond in wholeness. Similar type of words are there which are from the wholeness. Whether these can be connected internally and then find out some logical solution to understand what is love. That was my point.
Yeah, I mean, why we need to bring different words, it's mainly because the word love itself is so much loaded with different meanings that it's quite likely that we may just mistake one of those meaning as the true love. And therefore probably we need to bring another word to explain.
No, I am not referring to that.
Yeah.
Similar
No,
type of word,
yeah.
like whole with this love, not presume, but it is the wholeness.
Oh, love is the
Wholeness, we are trying to find out. Yeah, we are trying to find out what is the meaning of that particular whole love, going, through going negative to theory of negativity. So whether love is hate, no, hate is not love, then the attraction is not love, fascination is not love, etc., etc. But we are still, we don't understand what is love. Krishnamurti has said something about love. That is the reason we are trying to find out what is love. Krishnamurti was a really great person. He could, without any word, he could explain and understand from wholeness or beyond mind. So we are trying to find out somehow through the theory of negation, the meaning of, or whether we are going closer to that particular love, which is supposed to be pure one, which is not the away from the self, etc. So similar type of words are there, the meaning of which are not understood. So what I logically think, that these particular words, if we are able to think about togetherness, maybe through the theory of negativity, whether these things can be clearer.
No, but what you have explained, Subhashji, that is not what we are doing. We are not trying to find out words to describe or define what love is. In the field of consciousness, because it belongs to the same field, therefore we could define it, and we could say that, well, consciousness, a stream of consciousness and stepping out of the stream of consciousness and so on, because all that is very much in the field of consciousness. But now our difficulty is something which is not in the field of consciousness. Now, how do we define it using the content of the field of consciousness? We can't.
Let me clarify it.
Yeah.
That particular stream of consciousness, whatever Krishnamurti explained, coming back to this love, the thought about love.
Yeah.
So he also mentioned, somebody asked, so many scientists and so many saints, they asked him question, whether you have you are also part of that particular consciousness. So he said, no.
Yes.
So that triggers one particular message that means he had already something else as operating system,
Yes. Yes.
as we call as mind. So love is also of same time, same kind. What Krishnamurti thought about, and what we are going closer to that theory of, through the theory of negativity. Now, so far, many people they have done, and we are constantly doing that particular thing. And unfortunately, that we are not going. Unfortunately, we are not going closer to the love. Whatever we feel, maybe slightly some part of love, but it is not love. Whatever depicted by Krishnamurti, that something was different, as he had mentioned about the consciousness, that he is not part of
So,
that love.
yeah, no, I understand that. See, in the beginning itself, we said that the negation doesn't mean the intellectually agreeing that this is not love, this is not love. But that is what mostly we seem to be doing.
Correct.
So when I say that love is not desire or love is not pleasure, let us take that, right? When I say that love is not pleasure, right? Now, is that an intellectual statement defining love in terms of what it is not, right? So when I say that love is not pleasure, does it mean that I am defining love in terms of what it is not? That means it is not pleasure. Now, this definition is still very much the part of the known, very much the content of the consciousness.
Absolutely.
And therefore, what I was saying was that how can one define something which is completely outside the consciousness? How can one define that in terms of the content of consciousness? No, one cannot. So then what is it that we are trying to do, right? So what I was saying was that when we say that love is not pleasure, right? So does it mean that we have understood pleasure completely? It doesn't mean. We have simply, we know what is meant by pleasure. We know it intellectually or even actually also. And all that we are saying is that, well, that is pleasure and that is not love. So that is not negation. It only means that I still continue with my pleasure, I accept my pleasure, and now I only say that, yes, this is pleasure, this is not love. Now, that is not the kind of inquiry that is going to lead to what we call as love. That is merely intellectually agreeing that, yes, whatever I am going through is a pleasure and it is not love. But that intellectual agreement is not taking us any closer to that quality which we call as love. That means that is what you have rightly pointed out when you said that. So then what is that action which will take us closer to that quality? Now that action is the actual negation. Now what do we mean by actual negation? When we say that love is not pleasure, which means that we have nothing to do with pleasure. I am interested in finding out what love is. So why there is pleasure in my life? Rather, pursuit of pleasure, rather. So if the pursuit of pleasure is not love, then that pleasure has no place in my life. Because I want to find out what love is. Therefore, whatever that is not love has no place in my life. So which means that there is complete dropping away of that which is not love. Now that is the actual or real negation. But that will not happen unless one has gone into what is this pleasure, one has really come to understand what exactly or what actually it is. And therefore, out of that understanding, the pleasure or the pursuit of pleasure, that activity coming to its end. So that means I am no longer after pleasure. Right? So only that kind of action can bring us closer to that quality of love. But merely intellectually agreeing is not going to do anything. We are just going to remain where we are. And only thing we may be saying that, well, this is not love. I agree with that. Right? But I don't know what love is. It's not there in my life.
So I have a small question on this about this
Yes.
consciousness.
Yes.
The word consciousness has been brought in play. So I was wondering, because to me, consciousness is all pervading, all inclusive, and everything is consciousness. So am I right in thinking that love and consciousness, love would be in the field of consciousness? Am I making any
No,
sense in this?
Not at all.
Krishnaji doesn't define consciousness in that way. Krishnaji defines consciousness as the content of the consciousness. The consciousness is made up of its content. So what does that mean? That actually consciousness means this sense of being alive. We feel that we are alive. So that is what we say that we are conscious. Now machines don't have this sense of being alive, but the human beings have. We feel alive. Now what Krishnaji is saying is that we feel alive through some content, through something. And that something is becomes the content of consciousness. Because that is what then constitutes consciousness. Because if that something is not there, then we also don't feel alive. So for our sense of being alive, right, we feel alive through that something, and that something is the content of consciousness. So therefore, in that sense, Krishnaji says that the content of consciousness is consciousness. It's not different, right? But then there is another question, that can there be a sense of being alive without any content, without any need of the content, without any sense of content, right? But then if there is such a possibility, then Krishnaji doesn't call it as consciousness. He says that we don't have to even name it as consciousness. It is something totally different. It is some different dimension. So the existence may not be only confined to what we call as consciousness with its content, right? But existence may be something far more, can say, maybe a much larger thing. हिंदी में कहते तो बहुत व्यापक हो सकती है वो चीज लेकिन उसको फिर यूनिवर्सल कॉन्शियसनेस या ऐसे कुछ नाम देने की जरूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि द मोमेंट वी गिव लेबल टू इट, राइट, देन वी आर रिस्ट्रिक्टिंग it in some way.
Sir, can I say that we never loved anything in our life, even once, anyone or anything? Because always there is some attachment, possession,
That's right.
expectation, something or other.
Right.
So I'm dying myself without even knowing what is love, even once.
Dying?
I die without even knowing what is love, even once. Something like that.
Yeah, possibly.
Thank you.
Kernarji, you brought in consciousness, you brought in existence, and we were talking about love. So I'm not trying to intellectually dissect it, but existence व्यापक है और consciousness और love और एक अगर हम ऐड कर सकें कंपैशन, मुझे इन सब चीजों के बीच में कुछ कनेक्शन नजर आता है। क्या ये ठीक है? आई मीन आई एम नॉट ट्राइंग टू कनेक्ट इट इंटेलेक्चुअली, आई एम जस्ट just since I've been holding this for some time, so I wonder how Khernar Sahab would look at it.
No, what we are saying is that love is a quality which is not the product of the consciousness, or it's not thought, because we have said that the content of consciousness is put together by thought. So all the consciousness is the product of thought, but love is not the product of thought. So therefore it cannot be content of consciousness.
Oh, so now this is a major shift in my, thank you. I mean, I have never considered that consciousness is an outcome of thought, or rather an accumulation of thought.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing for me. Huge thing for me to look at. Oh, I thought consciousness is.
Oh,
You
this
thought
we had one
consciousness-
whole workshop on consciousness where all these things were studied.
Okay.
Mr. Varmaji, you may be thinking consciousness is the life principle in every being. Am I right, sir?
Yeah, you're right, sir.
Yeah, but
Yes.
Krishnamurti's definition of consciousness is different, sir.
Oh. I'll have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. I think it's time to stop now. Probably it's about 12:20. So we'll be meeting at 5:30 in the evening to take this exploration further. Then see you in the evening. So I stop the meeting now. That's right.
Thank you, Krishnamurti.
Thank you. So we'll meet at 5:30 in the evening.
Thank you, Kishorji.
Yeah, thank you.